Hi guys, Sean here from digiDirect. Today we're shooting indoors because it is raining cats and dogs out there, as you may be able to hear. But we're going to be looking at three new Sigma lenses that have just come out. That's the Sigma 24-70mm f2.8 Art Series lens, the 14mm f1.8 Art Series lens, and the 100-400 f5-6.3 Contemporary Series lens. Now these are all full frame compatible lenses. They obviously will work on crop sensors as well. They're out in Canon and Nikon mount. Now these lenses also all have a lot of expectations upon them, namely due to Sigma's very successful track record in recent years. Let's see if they stack up. We're going to start with a look at the build quality of the three lenses, and then we'll go into each of their individual qualities. So being in the same lineup, these lenses all share a lot of similar characteristics in terms of build quality. They are very, very well built. They're extremely solid and sturdy. The focus and zoom rings are rubberized. They feel great. They've all got focus distance meters, and overall they just look really high quality as well. And as I mentioned earlier, they are all weather sealed. They also share the one downside of the Art and Contemporary Series lenses in that they're not super light. They all weigh a little bit over a kilo, although the 14mm is actually the heaviest, even though the 100-400mm is the bulkiest. So the 14mm lens has just a simple AF/MF switch, while the 24-70 adds an optical stabilization or OS switch. The 100-400 also adds a focus distance limiter as well as two different OS modes and a custom OS switch, which is applicable if you've programmed your own OS behavior via the Sigma USB dock. The 100-400 also has a zoom lock, but it does not have a tripod collar like many lenses of this focal length. So if you're mounting it on a tripod, you're going to have to mount it based on the camera, which is going to make it a little bit front heavy, so be aware of that. The 14mm, like many wide-angle lenses, has a built-in lens hood, which means you're not going to be able to use screw-on filters here. The 24-70 comes with a detachable lens hood that has an 82mm filter thread, and the 100-400 also has a detachable lens hood, but it also has a finger groove on that lens hood, which gives you the option to zoom the lens via a push-pull mechanism rather than twisting the zoom ring, if you like. It also has a 67mm filter thread, which is actually smaller than you might expect for a lens of this focal length. So let's take a look at each of these lenses, their performance, and why they are useful. So the 24-70 is probably the biggest of the three here, at least in terms of how popular it's going to be based on just that focal length. That's a very versatile focal length, as I've mentioned, and probably one of the most commonly used focal lengths in full-frame cameras. The reason for that is that at 24mm, that's a nice wide angle that you can get some good landscape shots, whereas if you zoom into 70mm, then you've got a little bit more detail work going on. You can use that for portraits, compressing the background, and so on. The fact that it's a 2.8 lens is very useful, meaning that it's going to be good in low light conditions, and it also means that you're going to get some really nice shallow depth of field shots out of it, especially when you're at the longer focal lengths there. Again, very useful for portraits, for blurring out the background, and for a lot of different applications. The bokeh on this lens is really, really nice. It's really creamy, really smooth and regular. The optical stabilization on this lens is also quite useful. Many Art Series lenses don't have optical stabilization. This is going to let you stabilize your handheld shots to let you shoot at a lower shutter speed so that you don't have to push your ISO up as high in lower light conditions. It's going to help stabilize handheld video. Looking at image quality, happily I can say that the 24-70 lives up to the reputation of the Sigma Art Series lineup in that it has exceptionally high image quality. This lens is sharp. It's sharp even when you're shooting wide open, which has been a hallmark of the Art Series line. There's very little distortion and chromatic aberration and other lens imperfections and so on. It's got extremely high quality bokeh, as I've already mentioned. Just really, really, really high marks across the board. And spoiler alert, this is the case for the other two lenses that we're going to be looking at as well. Now, this is not a surprise to me because Sigma has been super consistent in the image quality from the Art Series lenses, but I'm very happy to say that it definitely does translate into this lens as well. Now, the key here is that this Sigma 24-70 f2.8 is going to be cheaper than the Canon and Nikon 24-70 f2.8 options. Here in Australia, it's going to be selling for about $600 or $700 cheaper than the first-party lenses, so I definitely can confidently say I think this lens is going to be extremely popular. Next up is the 14mm f1.8 Art Series lens. Now this one is actually rather interesting because it is now the fastest full-frame wide-angle lens available on the market. Now, what are you going to use that fast aperture for, though, in this 14mm lens? Since it is such a wide-angle lens, you're not going to be primarily using that for shallow depth of field because the wide-angle nature of that is going to, cancel out the shallow depth of field a little bit. That is to say that, though, you can still get some nice shallow depth of field on this lens if you're particularly close to your subject, and it does look quite nice when you get that. It's useful because it does have a 27cm minimum focusing distance, which is fairly close, so you easily can get close to a subject to achieve that shallow depth of field. But the main reason with a fast aperture on a lens this wide is going to be for the low light performance. So this is going to be a really useful lens for people who are shooting astrophotography, dark conditions, anyone who basically has to shoot wide-angle shots in lower light, dim conditions, particularly wedding photographers or event photographers shooting in dim churches or reception halls are going to find this very useful. Now, being quite a wide-angle lens, you are going to see some distortion in the photos here. That's pretty much unavoidable for a lens of this focal length. We see that in all other ultra-wides as well. It's not any more distorted than any other lens of this category, so I wouldn't say that there's any problems there. But it is there, so just be aware of it. And as I've already mentioned, like the 24 to 70 mm lens, the picture quality coming out of this 14 mm is exceptionally high. Again, even when you're shooting at f1.8, the max aperture, which most of these sample shots that you're seeing here were shot at f1.8, still tack sharp, still looks really, really good quality. Now again, similar to the 24 to 70, this 14 mm is priced cheaper than the Canon and Nikon 14 mm on the market. However, the Sigma version of the lens is faster than the Canon and Nikon lenses. Those are both 2.8 lenses. This is a 1.8 lens. So it's a faster aperture lens at a cheaper price. This lens is going to be a little bit less, has less widespread appeal than the 24 to 70, but for someone who's looking for a fast, wide-angle lens, this is going to be another excellent choice. Lastly, let's take a look at the Sigma 100 to 400 mm f5 to 6.3 Contemporary Series lens. This is perhaps the least immediately impressive lens of the three because it does not have a blazing fast aperture. Now, at f5 to 6.3, it's actually a little bit slower than the Canon and Nikon alternatives, those being the Canon 100 to 400 f4.5 to 5.6 and the Nikon 80 to 400 f4.5 to 5.6 lenses. However, this lens being a contemporary series lens, not an art series lens, is less focused on impressive specs and aperture and more on value. Now, I've already mentioned that the 24 to 70 and 14 mm Sigma lenses are a bit cheaper than the Canon and Nikon alternatives by a couple $100. This Sigma 100 400 mm is way cheaper than the Canon and Nikon lenses that it competes against. It's about a third the price of those lenses. This one is going to go for about $1,000 Australian. And those Canon and Nikon lenses are about $2,500 or $3,500. So the main value proposition of this lens is going to be to attempt to get something close to the performance of those lenses while being at a much, much lower price point. Now, at 100 400 mm, that's a fairly wide focal length to cover. The medium telephoto end, 100 mm, is going to be good for short-range telephoto stuff, even a little bit of portrait stuff if you like. But when you zoom into the 400 mm, that's going to be really useful for wildlife, nature, anything where you can't get close to your subject but you need a lot of zoom, sports games, and so on. However, the fact that it is a f5 to 6.3 lens means that you're going to be shooting at 6.3 if you're at the extreme end of the focal length, which may not be ideal for indoor or low light shooting. You're primarily going to be using this as a daytime lens if you're going to be regularly shooting on the long end. That may or may not be a huge concern for most people. I find that many people do tend to shoot at 400 mm if they're outdoors in the daytime anyways. There's not a lot of situations where you're indoors or in low light shooting at 400 mm other than maybe indoor sports. You also still can get some nice shallow depth of field out of this lens, even though it is 6.3, 400 mm is quite telephoto, which makes up for a little bit, allowing you to still achieve some nice shallow depth of field in the background. Again, image quality wise, as I've already said again, this is very, very high image quality. Like we saw on the Art Series lenses. I would say the Art Series lenses are a little bit higher in their image quality than this Contemporary Series lens, but it is still a very impressive performance in image quality, in sharpness, at its max apertures even. We also see the optical stabilization on this lens, which is key for a lens of this extreme focal length, helping you to stabilize your shots. So while it's not quite as fast apertured as the Canon and Nikon versions of these lenses, the fact that it's about, again, roughly 1/3 the price of those lenses represents an exceptional value for money proposition for a lens that still performs very admirably. So we can see that all three of these lenses perform extremely well and represent a really good value for money. I think the 24 to 70 mm lens is going to be the most popular just because of the widespread appeal of that focal length, but they all do really, really well in their own particular niches. Just definitely solidifies why the Sigma Art Series lineup, and to a lesser extent the Contemporary Series lineup, is just some of the best lens lineups on the market, and arguably the best when you look at the price you pay for the image quality that you get out of them. The only negative that I could really point to about any of these lenses is that they're not particularly lightweight and they're not particularly small, but considering what you are getting here, that's a fairly minor point. Now, you can order any of these Sigma lenses on our website at www.digidirect.com.au, or you can come into one of our stores and give them a play. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, Chatswood, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and Cannington, Western Australia. Thanks, guys. Take care.